This is the India story. I'm Vikram Chandra. Now, one of the most crucial days to keep track of the India story is Budget Day, because that's when we get a sense of the world's fifth largest economy and how it is doing. Today, Nirmala Sitharaman came out with a budget that seemed to be a bet on growth. The twin highlights: big bang spending on infrastructure, which would kickstart investment, and some tax reforms, which would presumably encourage consumption by the middle class. Now, why is all of that important? It's important because consumption plus investment means growth. And if India remains the fastest growing economy in the world, all of that spending will end up paying for itself, because as an economy grows, taxes go up. If taxes go up, it pays for the spending. It's a nice virtuous cycle if it works. And that's pretty much what the finance minister has bet on today in her budget. Now, we're going to look at all of those in some details. But first, let me just take you through some of the key highlights of the budget. 10 lakh crore rupees in spending for infrastructure. Defense spending is up too, but not as much as many had actually expected. But infrastructure spending has gone up. New tax slabs, especially in the new tax regime. In fact, the whole focus this time seemed to be to encourage people to move to the new regime. The new regime is actually going to be the default. You have to decide to stay in the old regime if you really want to. Tax exemptions are up sharply to 7 lakh rupees in the new regime. The maximum rate has also come down from 42.5% for the super rich to around 39%. So it's not just the middle classes who've got some relief, the super rich have got relief too. That's for income above 5 crore rupees. But there are riders to all of this, as they always are. Insurance premiums above a certain limit of 5 lakhs will not get exemptions. Insurance company stocks fell partly as a result of some of that. And there are other changes as well. Market-linked debentures will now pay full tax. It will be charged as per your short-term tax rate, which is something which is closing a loophole that has existed for a while. Senior citizens, though, get to invest more in senior savings schemes, and that is good news for them. 7 priority areas have got a spending boost, including the new economy. So those are some of the major highlights that Nirmala Sitharaman had in the budget, and a lot more besides. Well, for a lot more on all of this, we're now being joined by one of the most respected industrialists in the country. Mr. T. N. Narendran is the managing director of Tata Steel, one of the largest steel companies in India. He's also headed CII. Mr. Narendran, thank you for joining us on the India story. How do you think this budget addresses what CII has been asking for, what you in industry have been asking for? What are the big ticket announcements today that you think are really going to have an impact on the Indian economy?
I think, Vikram, in many ways, it addresses a lot of us of the industry and of CII. I think for the last few years, we've been saying that please keep focused on infrastructure. I think every year the allocation has increased, which is positive. And I think we're seeing money being spent on the ground in some sense of the term, because the focus on infrastructure has a huge multiplier effect. It helps cement, it helps steel, it helps automobiles, it helps construction equipment. It creates jobs because its infrastructure is built across a country. Second big advantage of the focus on infrastructure is it reduces the logistics cost, because in India that's higher than it is in the rest of the world. And when we look at competitiveness of industry, while we can drive competitiveness within the factory gates, we are dependent on some of these costs outside the factory gate. So that's a very big positive thing. There have been initiatives to address the ease of doing business, simplification of taxes. I also see some of the initiatives in the budget this year on trying to get consumption back on track, because I think rural consumption particularly has been a bit fragile post-COVID. I think the focus on increasing expenditure on health also addresses this subject indirectly, because one of the reasons why there's fragility in rural consumption is because people have spent more than they planned on medical expenses. So overall, I think it's a good budget. There's also focus on the long-term transition to green.
So the big bet is clearly on infrastructure, which should have made the markets happy, but they seem a little bit roiled today, not just insurance, but also, I guess, the Adani saga and some of the Adani stocks is still affecting the markets a bit.
Well, obviously, that's a factor which affects the equity markets. But, if you really look at the infrastructure which is being built, I think there are multiple industries, multiple companies involved. So, India traditionally has been more consumption-led growth, unlike many developing countries, including China, which has always been, at least for the last 2 decades, investment-led growth. In fact, China is trying to make this transition to a consumption-led growth kind of economy. So I think it was time for India to make that shift. And I think we are seeing the impact of that, across sectors. And like you said, steel benefits, but many other sectors will also benefit.
All right, Mr. Narendran, now it's not a one-off effort, of course, a budget. And I know CI has been talking and you have been talking a lot about the unfinished agenda. So if private industry is to step up and start investing, as I think the government expects you to, what more is it that you think needs to be done? I know, for example, you've been speaking about ease of doing business, ending harassment, steps like that. Is that what you think still needs to be done?
Absolutely. So some steps have been taken and it's obviously work in progress. I think making it easy to comply, certainly found feature in this budget. Decriminalizing a lot of the laws was also referred to. I think these are good actions. But also, I think as a country, if we really want to be an attractive investment destination, we need to really be aligned at the center, at the state, at the district, because oftentimes industry struggle, and hence, I think the fact that you really need to work hard to attract investments from the private sector is something which everyone needs to recognize. Even as a country, we are still continuing to compete with other countries who are also potential investment destinations. Similarly, at the state level, I know that many states are competing very aggressively with each other, but there's so much more we can do. And I think while the Indian investors, Indian entrepreneurs will be more indulgent when you are trying to attract foreign capital, they probably will be less indulgent. So we just need to be a bit more careful on that. Yeah.
All right. So as we've been saying all along, the key focus perhaps today, that big allocation for infrastructure. And for more on that, we're now being joined by Naina Lal Kidwai, prominent commentator. She's been one of the leading industrial bankers, everything. Naina, the banking sector, insurance sector looking a little bit nervous, I think, today, maybe because of some of those changes in insurance, or maybe it's the Adani Group. I don't know which one it is. What's your sense of the markets overall and the budget overall?
Vikram, just the budget itself has been, I think, a great step forward. I think many of us were nervous, given that this was really the last big budget, and therefore it could have been very much an election budget. But looking at the numbers and talking to some of my economist friends, I think there is a lot of credibility in the way the numbers have been put together. The fact that the fiscal glide path has indeed been adhered to at 5.9, I think there was some hope that it would be 5.8, but 5.9 is quite acceptable. And commitment to get down to the 4.5, as you well know, by 2026. And doing all this while the growth and infrastructure and capex is not just maintained, but actually going up, is a really very, very good step.
Okay, so tell me how it's happened. Naina, tell me how it happened, because I hear a lot of people asking that question. So in direct taxation, personal taxation, 35,000, given, foregone, if you like, and there's a big rise in spending and infrastructure, and the fiscal deficit is going down. So there's no magic in this. How is it actually being done?
So I think one, Vikram, is there's a degree of optimism on tax collections. And we've had a very strong year in terms of the collections, both the GST and direct over this last year. And there's a hope that that continues. Now, of course, to the extent that global recessionary fears, etc., impact performance in the country, they could go down. But the view right now is Indian industry is on a roll and very much driven by domestic demand, and not likely to be hugely impacted by global headwinds. I guess the big global headwind that could hurt us is oil prices, but that as of now looks like it's well under control, and one which we can manage. So if you look at the optimism on revenue collection, on the one hand, there is a second number which has crept in, which is the disinvestment number, and that does look a bit rich. It's at another 500 billion again this year, and we barely achieved 300 for the current year. So whether that could be achieved, that too in an election year, is a bit of a question.
Okay.
However, there is always the ability for government to scale back. And I haven't had a look at the food and fertilizer numbers, but as we go forward, it's quite likely that fertilizer prices come down. The subsidies that happened in fertilizer and food, which were very large, may give some leeway to ensure that we reach the fiscal deficit number as committed, despite the high capex spend.
So part of what you were saying was election year, a lot of people were expecting, maybe some populist measures, what are sometimes called populist measures. This, for example, is what an opposition leader, Shashi Tharoor, told us just earlier in the day, saying he's really quite upset about the spending in areas like Rega.
Yeah. And if you look at NREGA, the good news there is again that the states where the interest-free loans and funding has gone up, hence the 4.5% of GDP in terms of capex, there's actually guidance to the states to support government programs, to issue municipal bonds, which would suggest get your municipalities right, get the urbanization and urban infrastructure right. So in that, and use NREGA to get some of this work done. So I think NREGA will come up in many ways, not just through the direct disbursement from the center, but also in the way the states use the budgets and the funds that are provided to them.
Right. Last question to Nena. I know that today the budget's almost been overtaken in many people's eyes by some of what is happening around one of the largest groups in the company, the Adani Group, and issues around that. Are you picking up a lot of concern globally as to how this could affect the India story itself?
Vikram, not really, because I've been very focused on the budget. But the good news is Adani's FPO did close, and that I think was a big step. Essentially, I think the scrutiny that they will continue to be under, not just from the Hindenburg report, but also from regulators here, will continue. And I think to that extent, it will impact their prices, their share prices, and the way the market looks at them. Okay. But, this is really all part of being in the limelight, being on a high growth trajectory. And I hope for their sake and for India's sake that they come out okay at the end of this. Right. There's every indication right now that they have tackled some of these issues in the past. So we can only hope that it doesn't bring the markets down further.
All right. Nirmala Sitharaman, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you so much. And who better to take that conversation forward with than Madhusudan Kela. Is again one of the most respected voices in the Indian stock markets, has got his finger completely on the pulse. Mr. Kela, thank you so much for being with us. First of all, let me start off by asking you, what do you make of the budget? How do you think the stock markets have reacted to it from a short-term, medium-term, long-term point of view?
Vikram, thank you so much for having me, and it's very nice to speak to you after a long time. Vikram, I think budget was absolutely fabulous, I would say. The finance minister did deliver on all counts, whatever would have been expected of this budget, what she should not do and what she should do. I think she delivered actually on all counts. So let me touch, obviously, the obvious thing what she should not have done is touch the capital gains tax, which the market was very skeptical about, right? So there was no change out there. They actually delivered on the fiscal path. Not only did they deliver last year number, they guided for a lower number, and also they guided for a path of 4.5% fiscal deficit after 2 years. So then, the capital expenditure which the government has announced overall of 10 lakh crore rupees, that was also kind of a positive surprise, if I may say, from the market perspective. So that was also fully delivered. So third, she rationalized the taxes, gave a little bit more money in people's hand, which possibly will make the inflationary pressure less for the middle class people, and also they will have some money in their hand to spend. So I think on all counts, it was a very good budget, I would say.
Okay, so let me just look at some of those from a stock market point of view. And obviously, some of the insurance company stocks fell, that maybe because some of those, the premiums that could be paid are now being capped at a certain amount. So maybe the insurance companies were unhappy with that reason. Infrastructure stocks, you would expect to react really positively, because, and capital goods stocks also, because it's heading in a certain direction.
Yeah, of course, I would say, Vikram, if we treat this as a passing phase for the market, whatever is happening which is beyond budget, and I'm sure in due course of time, this will all get sorted out. And I'm opposed that the bottom of the story, specifically in the infrastructure sector, I would think in the capital goods sector will start to look good. Because, I don't remember ever in the history, Indian budget ever provided for 10 lakh crore rupees of capital expenditure in 1 year, ever in the history.
Yeah. In the stock markets itself, though, the entire infrastructure story may be overtaken a little bit today, at least by what's happening with the Adani company stocks. Adani Enterprise itself, after its FPO was successful yesterday, down by, nearly 23% or more. What is your sense of what is happening there?
So, see, I don't want to comment on the stock prices, Vikram, to be honest with you. Yeah. But I would go to the extent of saying Gautam Bhai has been very well known to me personally. And he has shown exceptional capability in the past to tackle some of these issues. And also, they have shown excellent execution in the past, right? They have managed to do so many acquisitions. They've been able to manage to consolidate. So, as Nana was saying, for India's sake and for his sake, I would wish that they overcome this short-term turbulence. And, because India definitely needs entrepreneurs like him to take the India story forward.
All right. So you're saying that it could be just short-term turmoil out there. Turning to one other sector, I mean, of course, Adani stocks have been rising very sharply. The other sector which has been doing really well is defense, and, many defense stocks. Today, they were again under a certain amount of pressure. Today, is that because maybe they were expecting a more larger amount of spending on defense?
Yeah, also it's a combination of factor, Vikram. Defense stocks had done so well. So there were a lot of expectations which were being built up. And typically pre-budget, all the defense companies, railways companies, they typically, see that everyone knows that there will be a good positive announcement. And we did not see anything in the defense today. So maybe a bit of reaction to that.
All right, fine. So any sectors you'd be particularly looking at, Madhu Kela, and overall, are you hopeful that this is going to be a good year for the Indian stock markets?
I would say overall, if you have a 3-year view, then this is good, interesting time to invest in equities. You need to buy selective shares. I'm more biased to buy shares in the financial sector, in the infrastructure sector. I'm more biased to ensure that I build a good portfolio which is linked to Indian economy and which is linked to India growth story. And I have really no reason to doubt on India growth story because of whatever is going on. I think this is a passage of time and it should settle down.
All right, Madhu Kela, always a pleasure speaking to you. Thank you so much.
I just want to say, one thing that you must run proper disclaimer that we obviously make a lot of forward-looking statements and people must consult their own investment advisor before acting on our advice.
Madhu Kela, thank you so much for joining us, though. It's always a pleasure speaking to you and getting your sense of what's happening.
All the best.
Thank you. Thank you so much. So I have to tell you, one of the highlights of the programming today was we got the chance to have CII Chief Chandrajit Banerjee with us at the same time as we had the Sherpa for G20, Amitabh Kant. And we asked them, and they asked each other, what was the big picture message from this budget to take to the rest of the world. So what better way to end this program with than to play that particular segment out for you.
My question, or rather a comment to Mr. Kant would be, he is the Sherpa, the G20 Sherpa, and today, and that's a huge opportunity for India this year. So what would he see as a couple of key messages that he will carry to the global community on India's from this budget about the attractiveness of India as a destination to get more investments, and attractiveness of India more capital, and what is India giving to the world, to the G20 from this budget? What really comes out from? I mean, he must have got some 3 or 4 important talking points for him for this year.
So, Chandraji, that's a very important comment that you've made, and let me spell out a few. Firstly, it highlights the transformational focus, the political will to take India to a new era of growth. It demonstrates the political will of the government to build a new India. It demonstrates the huge commitment to accelerate the pace of growth through capex expenditure and enhancing it very, very substantially. It also demonstrates that India wants to build really top-class quality infrastructure through airports, through railways. Look at railways, 2.4 lakh crores, outlay for railway. That's almost a 500% jump over what it had in 2013-14. And roads, highways, etc. It also focuses very strongly on travel and tourism. 50 tourism destinations to be selected through a challenge route. And secondly, that it wants to build an India which will be a decarbonized India. It wants to build an India which will be totally digital. So you are technologically pole vaulting through this budget. That is a big thing. And also it says that you are talking about 1 crore farmers to adopt natural farming and putting in at 1,000 bio input resource centers. So all in all, it's a budget for a green future. It's a budget for a huge amount of technological leapfrogging. And that's what makes it an extraordinary budget.
And that's it for the India Story this week. Thanks so much for watching. I'm Vikram Chandra. Do remember to tune in next week once again. For now, goodbye.